In 2024, 15-year-old Carly Gregg shocked a Mississippi community by killing her mother and attempting to murder her stepfather. Was this a tragic outburst from a troubled teen or a calculated crime? Today we uncover the chilling events that led to her life sentence. If you're into true crime and real-life mysteries, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. You'll get all the latest updates on cases just like this one, delivered straight to your feed. Don't miss out on more deep dives. Subscribe now. Carly Gregg was a 15-year-old girl from Mississippi who, until the year leading up to the crime, had been described by many as bright, academically gifted, and well-behaved. She had excelled in school, even skipping the 4th grade due to her academic achievements. However, as Carly entered her teenage years, troubling signs began to emerge. She started engaging in rebellious behaviors typical of adolescence, but with increasing severity. Carly was reported to have begun smoking marijuana and using vape pens, often hiding these activities from her family. These actions signaled a deeper disconnect between Carly and her mother, Ashley Smiley. Ashley Smiley, the victim in this tragic case, was a well-respected high school teacher at Northwest Rankin High School, where she taught algebra and geometry. Loved by both her students and colleagues, Ashley was known for her dedication to education. Her role as a mother, however, was always her top priority. Ashley was described as being deeply involved in Carly's life, doing her best to navigate the typical struggles of raising a teenager. Ashley's attempts to discipline Carly, particularly regarding her vaping, marijuana use, and secret relationships, became a source of conflict in their relationship. Heath Smiley, Carly's stepfather, played an important role in the family dynamic. Heath worked as a physical therapy assistant and had been a steady presence in Carly's life for nearly 4 years. By all accounts, Carly and Heath had a good relationship. He often took her to activities like guitar lessons and karate practice, and the two enjoyed playing video games together. Heath supported Ashley in setting boundaries and enforcing discipline at home, but he was also seen as the calmer, more approachable figure in Carly's life. Despite the issues between Carly and her mother, Heath maintained a close bond with his stepdaughter. The family's difficulties were not limited to the home environment. Carly's biological father, Kevin Gregg, had a troubled past, largely due to his struggles with drug addiction. Carly's parents divorced when she was very young, and the split was contentious. Kevin was reportedly an unpredictable figure in Carly's life. According to testimony, Kevin allowed Carly to drink beer at the age of 12 and was often unreliable during his scheduled visitation periods. Carly's mother, Ashley, was so concerned about Kevin's behavior that she kept a loaded firearm in the house for protection. This history contributed to the growing tensions in Carly's life. The strained relationship between her parents, combined with Kevin's instability, left Carly navigating two very different worlds. At home with Ashley and Heath, she faced increasing discipline and restrictions, especially as her mother tried to curb her rebellious activities. In contrast, her biological father's lack of boundaries likely provided her with an unhealthy outlet, which may have deepened the conflict between Carly and her mother. As Carly's behavior worsened, she became more secretive. She started using burner phones to communicate with her boyfriend and kept her social media accounts hidden from her family. These behaviors were part of a broader pattern of lying and defiance that put her increasingly at odds with her mother. While Ashley and Heath believed they were dealing with typical teenage rebellion, the truth was much more complex. Family arguments over Carly's behavior, particularly her drug use and vaping, became a constant source of tension. On the day of the crime, these underlying issues finally boiled over, leading to an unthinkable tragedy. On March 19, 2024, what began as an ordinary day for the Smiley family turned into an unimaginable tragedy. Carly Gregg and her mother, Ashley Smiley, left Northwest Rankin High School in the afternoon and returned to their home around 4 o'clock. The tensions that had been brewing between Carly and Ashley for months over Carly's behavior were about to come to a head. Ashley had recently learned that Carly had been hiding vape pens and marijuana in her room, behaviors that Ashley had repeatedly tried to address. Once they arrived home, the two were alone, accompanied only by the family's dogs. Surveillance footage from inside the house, which was later shown in court, revealed Carly's actions during these critical moments. As Carly let the dogs outside, Ashley went into her daughter's bedroom to search for the vape pens and marijuana she suspected Carly was hiding. What Ashley didn't know was that Carly had already made a fateful decision. Unbeknownst to her mother, Carly retrieved a .357 Magnum revolver that had been hidden under her parents' mattress. The gun had been kept in the house by Ashley and Heath for protection, but on this day, Carly had other plans. The surveillance video shows Carly concealing the revolver behind her back as she quietly moved through the house. She peeked into the kitchen to make sure her mother hadn't noticed her, then proceeded toward her parents' bedroom where Ashley was still searching Carly's belongings. The footage then reveals the horrifying moment when Carly entered the bedroom and fired 3 shots at her mother, striking her in the head and neck. Each shot was deliberate, and the medical examiner later confirmed that these gunshot wounds were fatal. The entire scene was over in seconds. Carly had killed her mother without any warning, and Ashley didn't have time to defend herself. Immediately after the murder, Carly's next moves were coldly calculated. She took her mother's phone and sent a text message to her stepfather, Heath Smiley, who was still at work. The text was short and unassuming. "When will you be home, honey?" Heath responded, saying he would be home in a little while. At this point, Heath had no idea what had just happened or that the message was not coming from his wife, Ashley. Meanwhile, Carly also reached out to one of her friends. She sent a series of text messages asking her friend to come over, but she didn't explain why. When the friend arrived at the house, Carly greeted her at the door with a chilling question. "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?" She then led her friend into the bedroom and showed her mother's lifeless body lying on the floor. Carly told her friend, "I put 3 in my mom and I have 3 more for my stepdad when he gets home." Her friend, in shock, didn't immediately comprehend what had happened, but Carly's words left no doubt about her intentions. As Heath Smiley made his way home, he remained unaware of the horror awaiting him. He arrived at the house at approximately 5:03 p.m., thinking everything was normal. However, as soon as he opened the door, Carly acted on her plan. She pointed the same .357 Magnum at Heath and pulled the trigger. The gun fired, but Heath, acting on instinct, managed to grab the weapon and wrestle it away from Carly before she could fire again. In the struggle, Heath was grazed by a bullet, but his quick reaction likely saved his life. Despite the chaos of the situation, Heath was able to overpower Carly and take control of the gun. Carly, realizing her plan had failed, fled the house by jumping over the backyard fence. Heath, wounded but alive, called 911. During the call, his voice was filled with confusion and disbelief as he tried to explain that his stepdaughter had just attempted to kill him and had already murdered his wife. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene within minutes, and a manhunt for Carly began. Deputies, along with a Mississippi Highway Patrol helicopter, scoured the surrounding area. Carly was found about half an hour later, not far from the house. She was taken into custody without incident. The .357 Magnum, which had only 1 bullet left in the cylinder, was recovered inside the house. Carly offered no resistance during her arrest and remained eerily calm throughout the process. The local deputies quickly responded to the scene, but due to the severity of the situation, a larger-scale operation was initiated. Law enforcement agencies, including the Mississippi Highway Patrol, joined forces in what became a statewide manhunt. A helicopter was deployed to assist with the search, scouring the area from above while deputies on the ground began canvassing the surrounding neighborhoods and rural areas for any signs of Carly. Despite the gravity of the crime, Carly did not flee far. Approximately 30 minutes after Heath's 911 call, Carly was found near the scene of the crime. She was discovered not far from her home, likely in shock but still calm and composed. Her demeanor during her arrest was consistent with the surveillance footage taken from the house just after the murder. In the footage, Carly had appeared unnervingly calm, walking through the home and interacting with her friend as if nothing had happened, even after showing her mother's lifeless body. When deputies approached Carly to take her into custody, there was no resistance. She complied with the officers' orders without any outbursts or attempts to evade arrest. The calmness that had marked her behavior in the moments after the murder persisted as she was led away by law enforcement. The absence of emotional reaction was noted by those involved in her arrest, standing in stark contrast to the brutal nature of the crime she had just committed. Once in custody, Carly was transported to the local detention center, where her case quickly escalated. Due to the severity of the crime, specifically the murder of her mother and the attempted murder of her stepfather, Carly was charged as an adult, even though she was only 15 years old. The decision to charge her as an adult reflected the premeditated and violent nature of the crime, which law enforcement believed warranted harsher legal consequences. Given the nature of the charges, Carly was held on a bond set at $1 million, a clear indication of the seriousness with which the court was treating the case. The high bond amount also reflected the potential flight risk and the violent circumstances of the crime. As the legal process moved forward, Carly's calm behavior in the aftermath of the crime became a focal point of the investigation and legal proceedings. Both the prosecution and the defense would later point to her demeanor as evidence of her state of mind, whether it reflected calculated planning or was a sign of underlying mental health issues. The trial began on September 16, 2024, in a Mississippi courtroom. Carly, who had been charged as an adult despite being only 15 years old at the time of the crime, entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The decision to go to trial set the stage for a tense legal battle, one that would hinge on the jury's interpretation of Carly's state of mind at the time of the murder. The prosecution's case was built on the argument that Carly's actions were deliberate and carefully planned. They emphasized that the crime wasn't a spontaneous outburst, but rather the result of calculated decisions made by Carly in the hours leading up to the murder. To support their case, prosecutors presented key pieces of evidence, including surveillance footage from inside the home, which showed Carly calmly walking through the house with the .357 Magnum revolver concealed behind her back, just moments before she shot her mother. The footage also captured Carly's composed demeanor after the murder as she lured her stepfather back to the house with a text message sent from her mother's phone and invited a friend over to witness the aftermath. Another crucial piece of evidence was the series of text messages sent by Carly both before and after the murder. Prosecutors argued that these messages, particularly the one sent to Heath Smiley, "When will you be home, honey?" demonstrated Carly's intent to deceive her stepfather and carry out a second murder. The prosecution also highlighted Carly's chilling statement to her friend when she arrived at the house. "I put 3 in my mom and I have 3 more for my stepdad when he gets home." These words, according to the prosecution, left no doubt about Carly's premeditation and intent. In addition to the physical evidence, the prosecution presented statements Carly made during her arrest and in the immediate aftermath of the crime. They argued that her calm demeanor, both during the murder and when law enforcement arrived, suggested she was fully aware of what she was doing. The prosecution painted a picture of a teenager who had planned to kill both of her parental figures and who had taken deliberate steps to execute that plan. In contrast, the defense focused on Carly's mental health, arguing that she was suffering from undiagnosed and untreated psychological conditions at the time of the crime. Carly's legal team presented evidence suggesting she had long been struggling with mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and possibly bipolar disorder. They argued that these conditions had gone unrecognized by her family and teachers, and that Carly was in the midst of a mental health crisis when she shot her mother. The defense brought in psychiatric experts to testify about Carly's mental state. These experts explained that Carly had exhibited symptoms of severe depression, anxiety, and self-harm in the months leading up to the crime. They also suggested that she may have been experiencing auditory hallucinations, hearing voices that influenced her actions. The defense team argued that Carly's mental health struggles were compounded by the stress of her family life, including the tension between her and her mother, as well as the difficult relationship she had with her biological father, Kevin Gregg, who had a history of drug abuse. One of the defense's key witnesses was a psychiatrist who had evaluated Carly and diagnosed her with bipolar disorder. This condition, they argued, contributed to her erratic behavior in the months leading up to the crime. The psychiatrist testified that Carly had been struggling with severe mood swings, depression, and anxiety, which had gone untreated. The defense pointed to signs of self-harm, including cutting, and reports that Carly had begun hearing voices, which the psychiatrist described as auditory hallucinations, often a symptom of a serious mental health disorder. According to the defense, Carly's mental health had deteriorated significantly, and on the day of the crime, she was in a full-blown mental health crisis. They argued that Carly's actions were not the result of cold calculation, but rather a consequence of her untreated mental illness, particularly her bipolar disorder. However, the prosecution challenged this narrative, presenting their own psychiatric experts who countered the defense's claims. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was Dr. Jason Pickett, a forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Carly after the crime. Dr. Pickett acknowledged that Carly had shown some signs of emotional instability, but strongly disagreed with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder and the idea that she had been in a psychotic state during the crime. He argued that Carly's actions, both before and after the murder, were far too calculated to be attributed solely to mental illness. Dr. Pickett's testimony was particularly impactful. He explained that Carly's calm demeanor throughout the incident, from the moment she shot her mother to the way she lured her stepfather back home, showed a level of control and intent that was inconsistent with a mental breakdown. He cited the surveillance footage, which showed Carly walking through the house with a concealed weapon just before the murder, and her interactions with a friend after the fact, as clear signs that she knew exactly what she was doing. More controversially, Dr. Pickett testified that Carly displayed traits commonly associated with psychopathy. He pointed to several key behaviors: media, courtroom sketch of psychiatrist testifying, text message on phone screen, her apparent lack of remorse, her calm and collected demeanor after committing the crime, and her manipulation of the situation, particularly the way she sent a text message to her stepfather from her mother's phone to lure him home. Dr. Pickett also noted Carly's journaling, which contained disturbing references to violence. In one entry, Carly had written that it's okay to be evil. Dr. Pickett argued that this type of writing, along with her fascination with violent themes, indicated a premeditated plan rather than an impulsive act driven by mental illness. According to Dr. Pickett, Carly's calmness and manipulation were not consistent with someone experiencing a psychotic break. Instead, he suggested that Carly had a deep-seated understanding of her actions and that her decision to carry out the crime showed an alarming lack of empathy or emotional response, traits often seen in individuals with psychopathic tendencies. Heath Smiley's testimony during the trial provided a deeply personal and emotional account of his relationship with Carly Gregg. As both a victim and a key witness, Heath's role was particularly complicated. Despite being the target of Carly's attempted murder and the loss of his wife, Ashley, he did not testify with anger or condemnation. Instead, Heath offered a compassionate perspective, rooted in his belief that Carly was not in her right mind at the time of the crime. Heath described his relationship with Carly before the tragic events as loving and supportive. He had been Carly's stepfather for nearly 4 years, and by all accounts they shared a strong bond. Heath spoke about the many activities they did together, like playing video games and going to her karate and guitar lessons. He emphasized that prior to the incident, Carly had been a well-behaved and loving child, and he saw no signs of deep emotional turmoil that would suggest such an outcome. Heath portrayed Carly as a typical teenager who occasionally got into trouble but was otherwise bright, caring, and eager to please her family. Heath's testimony took a particularly emotional turn when he recounted the events of March 19, 2024, the day of the crime. He described how, after arriving home from work, he opened the door to be greeted by the sight of Carly pointing a gun directly at him. Without hesitation, Carly pulled the trigger and Heath was grazed by a bullet. He instinctively grabbed the revolver, wresting it away from Carly before she could fire again. Despite the shock and danger of the situation, Heath's primary emotion in court was not anger or fear, but confusion and heartbreak. He explained that in the moments following the attack, Carly was not the same girl he had known. She appeared terrified and out of control, almost as if she were in a state of panic or delirium. Throughout his testimony, Heath expressed his belief that Carly was not in her right mind during the attack. He suggested that her mental state had deteriorated in ways that neither he nor Ashley fully understood before the incident. Heath told the jury that he could not reconcile the loving stepdaughter he had raised with the actions she took that day. He believed that Carly's actions were a result of mental illness, not malice, and he pleaded for the jury to consider this when reaching their verdict. Despite the pain of losing his wife and the trauma of nearly being killed himself, Heath continued to express compassion for Carly. He told the court that he still loved her and saw her as a victim of her own mental health struggles. His testimony was deeply moving as it highlighted the complexity of his feelings, grief for his wife, shock at the events, but also a profound sense of empathy for Carly. After weeks of testimony and emotional courtroom proceedings, the jury reached a verdict in the trial of Carly Gregg. On the charge of first-degree murder for the killing of her mother, Ashley Smiley, Carly was found guilty. The jury also convicted her of attempted murder for the shooting of her stepfather, Heath Smiley, as well as tampering with evidence for her attempts to destroy or conceal key pieces of evidence after the crime, such as removing surveillance footage and hiding the gun. The evidence presented by the prosecution, particularly the surveillance footage and Carly's calm demeanor during and after the crime, played a significant role in the jury's decision. The prosecution successfully argued that Carly's actions were premeditated and deliberate. The text messages she sent to her stepfather to lure him home, along with her chilling remark to a friend that she had 3 more bullets for him, painted a picture of a calculated and cold-hearted plan. Despite the defense's claims of mental illness and their presentation of psychiatric experts, the jury ultimately rejected the insanity defense. The jury's decision reflected their belief that Carly was aware of her actions and had the intent to commit murder. They did not accept the defense's argument that Carly's undiagnosed mental illness, including bipolar disorder and her reported auditory hallucinations, rendered her incapable of understanding the consequences of her actions. Instead, the jury sided with the prosecution's view that Carly's behavior, particularly the manipulation and planning, demonstrated a clear awareness of right and wrong. The calm, composed manner in which she carried out the crime weighed heavily in favor of a conviction. Once the guilty verdict was delivered, the sentencing phase began. Given the severity of the crimes, Carly was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This sentence meant that Carly, who had just turned 15 at the time of the crime, would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The judge's decision to impose the harshest sentence available was based on the gravity of the murder, the attempted murder, and the evidence showing that Carly had acted with intent. The rejection of the insanity defense was significant. While the defense had presented Carly as a mentally ill teenager suffering from untreated conditions, the jury and judge ultimately viewed her as fully responsible for her actions. This verdict reflected the court's determination that Carly's mental health issues did not excuse the brutality of her actions or absolve her of guilt. The case set a clear precedent that, even in cases involving minors with mental health challenges, the courts could deliver severe penalties if the evidence showed premeditation and intent. The sentencing brought a sense of closure to the legal proceedings, but it left lingering questions about Carly's mental health and how much her untreated conditions may have influenced her actions. For the community, the verdict marked the end of a deeply unsettling case, but the consequences for Carly were permanent. At just 15 years old, she faced the reality of spending her life in prison, without the possibility of a second chance. The jury's decision was a reflection of the seriousness of the crime and the calculated nature of Carly's actions, despite her age and mental health claims. Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into more true crime cases like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth stories. See you in the next one.